united against Trump. Leaders from some of the world's largest powers right now joining forces to take on the White House. And the images are striking. Russia's Vladimir Putin shaking hands and laughing with Chinese President Xi Jinping and India's Prime Minister Modi, at one point even holding hands with Modi. The show of unity in China clearly designed to send a message to Trump and what Xi calls his, quote, bullying practices. The trio is notably about to be joined by another U.S. adversary, North Korea's Kim Jong-un. This is a picture of him in his bulletproof train, reportedly just now crossing into China. Kim steps onto the world stage fresh off a tour of his country's newest missile factory, one that North Korea claims is a cornerstone of its military expansion. A military that, according to Ukraine, is on the verge of sending up to 30,000 troops to Eastern Europe to provide Russia with more manpower. And as Trump watches these world leaders gather without him, he is lashing out at one. India's Narendra Modi, writing online that America's relationship with India has been a, quote, totally one-sided disaster. And yet, the one leader who is evading Trump's ire is Vladimir Putin, a man whose military launched a round of overnight attacks on Ukraine yet again. Also, the man who went before cameras today attempting to rewrite history, insisting that his invasion is all Ukraine's fault.
I will remind you that this crisis was created not as a result of Russia attacking Ukraine. It emerged as a result of a coup d'etat in Ukraine that was provoked and supported by the West.
Trump's prolonged silence on Putin's actions may also be emboldening the Russian leader. We're now learning a plane carrying the European Union's top official was targeted by the Kremlin. Shortly before landing, we're told the jet's GPS system was jammed by Russian technology. Ursula von der Leyen's plane was able to land safely using paper maps. The EU's top leader, we should point out, is a staunch defender of Ukraine. We have Ivan Watson tonight out front live in Beijing, as well as Kristen Holmes at the White House. Let's start with Ivan. Clearly a busy and symbolically important day for Xi, who is readying to hold this one-on-one with Putin.
That's right, that one-on-one, which is expected to take place here in the Chinese capital later today. You know, while the U.S. and the Trump administration have been disrupting America's traditional foreign policy position by with its global trade war, with the cutting back on international aid, with sharp criticism of traditional allies, China has been using this opportunity to present itself to its friends and partners and the world as a reliable, stable, and predictable global power.
A show of international solidarity at a time of global uncertainty. Leaders of three of the world's largest countries happily rubbing shoulders at a summit of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization in Tianjin, China. The leaders of China and Russia have long complained that the U.S. and its Western allies have dominated international relations. So now they've gathered heads of state from across Asia and the Middle East into this vast building to call for the creation of a new world order. The host, Chinese President Xi Jinping, denouncing bullying and double standards and promoting China as a champion for developing countries.
The house rules of a few countries should not be imposed upon others.
Those points echoed by his close partner, Vladimir Putin. Even as his military continues its nightly bombardment of Ukrainian cities, defying U.S. President Donald Trump's demands for peace. But the Russian president accuses the West of starting Russia's war with Ukraine and makes his own appeal for a new global system of governance.
A system that would replace the outdated Eurocentric and Euro-Atlantic models, taking into account the interest of the broadest possible range of countries, truly balanced.
But it is the presence of India's Prime Minister that has been most notable at this gathering. Narendra Modi came to China, still stinging from 50% tariffs imposed by the Trump administration on Indian goods. Snubbed by Washington, Modi is now mending fences with China, despite an ongoing Chinese-Indian border dispute that 5 years ago turned very deadly. Modi also spent an hour talking to Putin in the Russian president's limousine, demonstrating India has other powerful friends if it can no longer count on U.S. support.
So the Chinese leader Xi Jinping has been flexing his diplomatic muscles at that river port city of Tianjin at this regional security summit. Now expect him to flex his military muscles, quite literally, because on Wednesday he's going to be putting on a massive military parade here in the capital, Beijing, to commemorate the 80th anniversary of the surrender of Japan in World War II. Dozens of world leaders are expected to attend. The Russian President Vladimir Putin is here in Beijing. The Iranian president is expected to attend. And the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un is expected to attend as well. And according to Korean Central Broadcasting, his train has crossed the border from North Korea into China and is likely on its way here to Beijing right now. Boris?
That'll be quite a set of images. Ivan Watson, live for us in Beijing. Thank you so much. Let's go to Kristen Holmes out front at the White House. Kristen, a major show of force by America's adversaries, all organized by Xi. Trump largely silent about the Chinese leader, though. What is the White House thinking on all of this?
Well, Boris, as you noted, I mean, the Prime Minister of India, Modi, is sending a clear message to Washington amid these 50% tariffs, which we know from hearing from economists in India have really been detrimental to the country and long term will really hurt the country's economy. So President Trump has been taking out most of his frustration on Modi. It's a signal that Modi sent that was picked up by the White House. You noted that Truth Social post talking about this relationship, saying it was one-sided, blaming the Prime Minister. We also heard from one of Donald Trump's top trade advisors who called the show of unity troublesome.
It's time for Modi to step up. I have great respect for Modi. I love the Indian people. It was a shame to see Modi getting in bed as the leader of the biggest democracy in the world with the two biggest authoritarian dictators in the world, in Putin and Xi Jinping. That doesn't make any sense.
So clearly here you have the White House blaming Modi, blaming India for this, but we should make one thing clear, and I know Ivan laid this out. There was a strained relationship for years between China and India. This is the first time Modi has been back.
Well, turning to China now, where the country's biggest diplomatic event of the year has wrapped up. For the past 2 days, President Xi Jinping hosted, as you can see, their world leaders at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit, including Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Russian President Vladimir Putin. Their growing strategic partnership was clear from the get-go, with all three leaders huddled close together, smiling and laughing. There was also a shot of the Indian Prime Minister and Russian President sharing a car ride together, with Mr. Modi writing on social media their conversations with Mr. Putin are, quote, always insightful. President Putin also used the forum to defend his war in Ukraine and reiterate his talking points. He praised efforts by China and India to find a resolution and made reference to the recent summit in Alaska with US President Donald Trump. Have a listen.
Мы широко ценим усилия и предложения.
We value the efforts and propositions of China, India, and other strategic partners of ours to solve the Ukrainian crisis. The mutual understanding that was reached at a recent Russia-US summit in Alaska heads in the same direction, I hope. It paves the way to peace in Ukraine, I hope.
Well, to help us unpack the latest, let me bring in our Mark Stewart, who's joining us, staying up late for us, and we're incredibly grateful from Beijing. Mark, let me start with those images that you were showing our viewers there. They tell quite a story, right? A show of force, a show of unity, which is what they want to portray, even potentially if those images may have been choreographed or improvised. Just talk us through what came out of the summit and what Xi Jinping's message critically was here.
Righty, so let's not downplay these images, the optics, because this symbolism tells a much broader story about China trying to appeal to the rest of the world as China really tries to establish itself as the leader of a new world order. So I think it's very safe to say that Beijing sees these images that we have been broadcasting as a very high point of the summit, in addition to some of the politics and the economics that we're discussed. I mean, China, without question, is using the summit as an opportunity to portray itself as this alternative to the West, to these traditional alliances like NATO, and as the leader of a new world order, as a nation that is strong, that is stable, and that is predictable and not necessarily full of surprises, as many nations have seen in dealing with the United States. Let's take a brief listen to some of Xi Jinping's remarks.
We should advocate for an equal and orderly, multipolar world and a universally beneficial and inclusive economic globalization, and make the global governance system more just and equitable.
Now, we didn't necessarily hear the United States being mentioned by name, but there were some hidden, some veiled references. There are a lot of phrases that we hear Beijing use when referring to Washington, such as bullying. That is a phrase that came up in the discussion.
Think back to this moment, and it was when Trump wasn't president anymore. It was probably 2013, early 2014. And he had a moment in one of his interviews where he was actually discussing something interesting. Talking about how when he was in college, he had a professor, and the professor basically said, one of the things that you have to make sure when you're doing international affairs is that you don't let China and Russia become too close to one another, because if you do, they're too powerful. They're too big of a country. Like, even put aside if they're communist or whatnot, because right now Russia is a capitalist nation, China's a communist nation. But the point was that if they're too united, that's too powerful, and you need to keep them separated. That was the theory, at least. And, like, whether you agree with that theory or not, like, Trump sort of thought about this and said, well, Biden's failing because, China and Russia are getting closer together. But, like, to be very clear, Trump has pushed those two countries closer together than anyone in modern history, and he's also pushing other countries together as well. And I think maybe he's starting to realize that. I don't know, because his tariff policies have pushed these countries together, right? One being an unreliable ally, right? In the sense that you build these alliances and these trade deals, and then you flake on them. People can't trust you, even if you flake in a positive way, like you flake and then you're doing a nice thing for them. You can't build diplomacy on quicksand. It's got to be based on something a little bit more stable, right? But also the sense that Donald's tariffs are creating an incentive for these countries to work together. The United States, one thing it always did was be like a facilitator of trade, right? That's what it's done since 1945. And it's generally empowered the country, right? And now Donald is saying, well, I don't really want to do trade anymore. So now Russia, China, India, these countries have not had stable relationships. China, Japan, South Korea, again, three countries that despise each other for some pretty important historical and modern reasons. And yet they're all uniting in a sense, if only partially, because of trade. Because Trump has made it so that they can't trade with the United States as much. They'll trade with each other. Life goes on, right? In addition to the fact you have the United States leaking info, like Pete Hegseth and on the group chat, even if they're not being nefarious, how is Japan, for instance, going to trust the Trump administration with military secrets? They can't. So any way you slice it, he's screwing up.